Cheap, cheesy, busted, oonga boonga, overpowered. If you've played Tekken or fighting games in general for any amount of time, you've probably been on both the giving and the receiving end of these descriptions. Competitive games are often frustrating by their nature, but it's especially true when you feel like your loss wasn't caused by your own mistakes. In fighting games, this usually comes through the form of blaming various system mechanics, the connection, or your opponent's character. But when it comes to Tekken, are things really that bad? Even though 100% of the Tekken cast was at one point accused of being cheesy or broken, most people would probably agree that it's one of the more balanced fighting games, where even the worst characters can shine in the right hands.
Panda. Panda. Really?
With that in mind, we want to take a look at what even defines a cheap or honest character, and how much validity these complaints carry. So strap in, relax, and join us on this journey of possibly upsetting the mains of any and all characters. What defines a cheap character in Tekken? Some might call this a simple question and would be eager to list out at least a dozen of their most disliked characters. However, we need something more concrete. A list of not characters, but qualities that make someone cheap. Luckily, there is no shortage of player feedback and salty rants to sort those qualities from. Our first quality should be rather obvious, with both Akuma and Geese being dominant characters throughout their existence. They had plenty of time to draw ear from the players. You could summarize their common quality as 2D, but we think it's more accurate to define them as rule breakers. After all, what can make these characters feel cheap is that they go against the rules and conventions of Tekken. Jump-ins in a game with no anti-airs, a normal job suddenly becomes a massive combo starter. And that's not to mention projectiles, invincible reversals, or special meters that enable huge comebacks. However, these characters aren't the only ones to go against the grain. For example, Yoshimitsu's Flash has long defied the laws of Tekken, punishing things that are usually more than safe. And speaking of safety, we have another trio of rule breakers that might have been better off joining Yoshimitsu in Soul Calibur. While Tekken typically allows you to low parry virtually any low attack, headbutts, elbows, knees, weapons, and projectiles are afforded an immunity. Yet, it never really was much of an issue until Tekken 7, where Kunimitsu, Negan, and Noctis made great use of this exception. Our cheap list keeps on growing, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. The next common complaint comes in the form of evasion, and it's easy to see why. Fighting game players value consistency and clarity, but evasive actions in Tekken can often be either too sudden or hard to read, losing you the turn at best or half your life bar at worst. Ling Xiaoyu is perhaps the best example of this, as much of her toolkit revolves around evasion, and the Art of Phoenix stance routinely goes under many mid-attacks in the game, but she's so far from being the only offender when it comes to evasion. Even such a beloved character like Steve can use his boxing prowess to weave around your attacks. If we only add characters with even moderate or decent evasion on the cheap list, that alone would expand it quite a lot. Moving on, we got the throws, and more specifically, characters with a full throw game. While Tekken pros almost make this category of moves seem useless, it's a nightmare for beginners and even some of the higher ranked players who didn't put the time in to practice their throw breaks. And of course, their opponents will happily abuse this, as they should. The gimmicks is another exceedingly common yet conveniently vague objection against some characters. Most of the time, it comes down to unique mechanics like Elisa's Destroy Form or Fakamram's Guard Break. But it also stands for, this character has confusing offense, which usually targets less commonly played or more unorthodox characters that require more matchup knowledge than none at all. But of course, you don't need something crazy to be cheap. Just having too complete of a toolkit or too strong of pressure is enough for people to claim that a character is cheap or Oonga Boonga, which typically means that they have a strong offense or can keep you locked down in fear of counter hits or mix-ups. With that, our list is finally complete. Do the results look accurate? Maybe it should be like this, or more like this. Regardless of how you want to spin it, if we base these judgments on what Tekken players have been complaining about, then just about every character in the game is cheap. Sure, there will be degrees to it. Some characters might only fit one or two qualities, while others will collect them like postage stamps. But it doesn't change the greater picture. but maybe we can gain more clarity by looking at what would count as an honest character. If any of you try to come up with a consistent definition of what would count as an honest character in Tekken 7, you have our sincere condolences. The opinions couldn't be more divided here. Whenever people actually talk about an honest character, it sounds more like they are describing a character that is weak, unremarkable, lacks defined strengths, and is potentially useless. Their damage isn't too high, their mix-ups are not too difficult to deal with, their move list is very straightforward and easy to understand. Even the weakest characters would struggle to meet this criteria. Fortunately, there are some simple formulas to help us shed some light on which characters are truly fair, hard to play, honorable, and are exemplary all around. And here it is. Character I play equals honest. Character you play equals cheap. That's all there really is to it. Much like with beauty, the cheese is in the eyes of the beholder. Everyone will have their own limits and definitions of what's fair, but let's be real here. Most of the time, it's really just an excuse to explain away your losses and otherwise offload your frustrations onto something else. In the early era of fighting games, many developers had no idea what they were doing. Everyone was still learning how to design games in this new genre and exploring new ideas. Back then, if a game came out with some flaws, like poor balance or bugs, that was it. Your only option was to hope that the developers would notice the issues and fix them in the next edition of the game, if it even gets one, or a sequel. That's when you had games that were full of genuinely cheap stuff. Stuff like King's Down Forward 1 in the original Tekken, which was plus 93 on block. Or how about the 3DS Guile, who did charge moves by pressing a button? Not to mention the numerous infinite combos that were a result of oversights. It might sound bad on paper, but people still played those games, adapted, and had fun. That's not to say that bad balance or bugs are good things, or even something you should tolerate. It's just that these days, when developers can refine their games one patch at a time, it's exceedingly rare to run into something truly broken. While mistakes happen and sometimes take too long to resolve, the majority of mainstream fighting games offer you a fairly smooth experience. That's why when people think something is cheap, chances are it's not. They're just frustrated and they want to take it out on something other than themselves. Unfortunately, this creates an environment where people throw up their hands instead of looking for answers to their problems, or even belittle others and their accomplishments based on a character they play in a video game. The good news though, should they want it, these frustrations can always be fixed. If your response to running into something annoying in a fighting game is to find a solution, then not only will you save yourself some nerves, but you will also improve much faster than people who get hung up on the perceived unfairness. Just something to keep in mind with Tekken 8 on the horizon. Our video today might be more confrontational than usual, but if there's something that you take away from it, it should be this. Your character isn't cheap, and neither is your opponent's. Play whoever you find cool or fun, without ever concerning yourself with what others might think. And let others do the same. It's fighting games after all. We're all here to mash buttons and have fun.
Yes. Just one thing I want to say. Fighting game is something so great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching all the way through. Make sure to tell us what you think about this video in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.